The world had once been a beautiful place, teeming with life. The cities hummed with energy, the streets bustled with people, and nature itself seemed to dance in rhythm with the pulse of humanity. But the rage virus shattered all of that. It wasn't a disease like any other. It didn't simply kill. It transformed that it wasn't a plague of death, but of chaos. The virus spread swiftly, turning those infected into wild, frenzied killers. Humanity, for all its technological advancements, was no match for the speed and brutality of the infection. And then, like a horrible wave crashing over the earth, cities fell, governments crumbled, and civilization was swallowed up by the horror. For years, survivors were left to fight the infected and each other. In the aftermath of the outbreak, only a few places remained untouched. One of those places was Northumberland Island, a sanctuary that seemed like a distant memory of a time before the infection. But even here, the shadows of the past were never far behind. Northumberland Island was supposed to be a place of safety, a haven for the survivors who had sought refuge from the chaos of the mainland. It had been a dream, and for 28 years, it had been a hopeful reality. Jamie, Isla, and their son Spike lived here, one of the few families to survive the initial outbreak. But even in paradise, there were cracks in the foundation. The island was small, isolated. It had no place for luxuries, no bustling markets, and no shining lights. What it had were gardens and fields, places where the survivors could grow food and live in peace if they stayed vigilant. But life on the island was far from easy. Supplies were limited, and the fear of the infected was ever present. Though they had not been seen for years, still, it was on this island that Spike had grown up. He didn't know a world before the virus, only stories from his father and the whispers of those who had been born before the outbreak. He saw the island as his entire world, a world full of safety, routine, and the comfort of isolation. But things were changing. Isla was sick, and not just a simple illness. This was something more. It was a slow deterioration, a mystery that no one could solve. No doctor had the answers. Despite all their efforts, she was getting weaker each day. The world outside, once terrifying, seemed to be the only place that could hold a solution. But even in that, there was no certainty that Jamie's desperation became palpable. The idea of leaving the island, the only safe place they knew, was a terrifying thought. But Isla needed help, and there was only one place left to turn: the mainland. If they didn't go, there was a real chance they'd lose Isla forever. So, one fateful night, Jamie made the decision. He would take Spike, leave everything they had known, and venture into the unknown, hoping to find help that would save Isla. The boat rocked gently on the water as Jamie and Spike sat in silence. The wind cut through their clothing, the chill of the night making it hard to speak. Spike had so many questions, but he didn't ask them. He could see the tension in his father's face, the unspoken fear that he was trying so desperately to hide. "It'll be okay, Spike," Jamie said softly, his voice more of a reassurance to himself than to his son. "We'll find what we need on the mainland. We'll get you Mother the help she needs." Spike nodded, his eyes scanning the horizon. He wasn't sure what to think. The mainland had been nothing but a legend to him, a place filled with the infected, full of chaos. He had no idea what awaited them, but the fear in his gut told him they might never return. As the days stretched on, the sea seemed endless. Waves crashed against the boat, the only sound the wind and the occasional lapping of water. The island was becoming a mere dot on the horizon, fading into the distance, leaving behind the only life Spike had ever known. The world outside was no longer just a distant memory. It was becoming his reality. The closer they got to the mainland, the more Spike's stomach twisted in knots. Every wave seemed to echo the uncertainty of the journey. Was this a mistake? Was his mother going to be okay? Were they stepping into a world far worse than the one they had left behind? When they finally reached the coast, Spike's first thought was that the world had died. The mainland was nothing like he had imagined. Where he had expected chaos and destruction, he found something worse: silence. The streets were empty, the buildings abandoned, the world almost frozen in time. The cities he had heard about, the great structures, the monuments to human ingenuity, were nothing more than hollow shells, crumbling under the weight of neglect and decay. The air felt different here, heavier, more oppressive. And it was a smell he couldn't quite place, a mix of rot, decay, and an underlying sense of loss. Jamie led him through the silent streets, every step filled with an eerie sense of dread. This was the world they had once known, but it had been torn apart. The survivors, scattered and lost, had been swallowed by this desolate land. It was in one of these forgotten corners of the city that they found what they were looking for, a clinic. Abandoned but intact. Dr. Ian Kelson, a former scientist who had spent years studying the virus, was their last hope. The moment they walked into the clinic, Kelson's sharp eyes studied them. He hadn't expected any new visitors. Most had long since given up. But when he saw Isla, his face softened. He was quiet for a moment, weighing his options, before he spoke. "Why have you come here? What's left to save?" he asked, his voice tinged with a bitter sadness. "We need help," Jamie said, his voice cracking slightly. "My wife, she's sick. She's been getting worse, and no one on the island knows what's happening." Dr. Kelson stared at Isla for a moment, then nodded. "The virus has mutated. It's different now. What you're dealing with here, it's something beyond what we thought possible." Jamie's heart sank, but he didn't lose hope. This was their chance. If anyone could help Isla, it was Kelson. The clinic, despite its dilapidated state, felt like a lifeline. The sterile smell of old medical equipment mixed with the mildew that had crept into the walls. Dr. Kelson led Jamie and Spike into the heart of the clinic, his every movement precise and calculated. He had lived here for years, a man broken by the weight of the world, but not completely defeated. Kelson's laboratory was sparse but functional. Shelves were lined with faded medical journals, and rusted metal cabinets held supplies that had long expired. It was clear that the world's former luxuries had no place here. Survival had become the only goal. "Sit her down," Kelson instructed, his voice soft but urgent. Isla had begun to tremble again, her condition worsening by the minute. Jamie helped her onto an examination table, looking at the scientist with an intensity that conveyed more than words could. Kelson pulled over an old notebook, flipping through it quickly. He stopped on a page, his brow furrowing. "This is worse than I thought. The mutation, it's more complex than anything I've seen." Spike watched as his father leaned in, trying to make sense of the words on the page. But the more Jamie read, the more he realized that what they were up against wasn't just a cure for Isla. It was a battle against a virus that had evolved, something the world had never prepared for. "Can you help her?" Jamie asked, his voice a whisper, the weight of his fear heavy in every syllable. Kelson's eyes softened for a moment, but the flicker of doubt was clear. "I don't know if I can," he admitted, "but I can try. That's all I can offer you. I've been working on something, a treatment, but it's unfinished. Without the right ingredients, there's nothing I can do." Jamie clenched his fists, frustration bubbling up. The world outside was dangerous, but this, the idea that they were so close to a cure, yet so far, was unbearable. Time was running out. "We'll help," Jamie said, his voice now firm with resolve. "Whatever it takes." Spike stood there quietly, taking in the gravity of the situation. His eyes flicked between his father and Isla. The grown-ups spoke of the virus and treatment, like they understood the battle. But for Spike, it was something simpler. He couldn't lose his mother. Not after all they had fought to survive. Days passed in the clinic, with Dr. Kelson working tirelessly on Isla's treatment. Jamie and Spike took shifts, collecting supplies from the nearby ruins and keeping watch over the clinic. The mainland was no safer than they had anticipated. The infected, though fewer in number, had grown increasingly hostile, hunting for anything living. Kelson had warned them that the infected weren't just animals anymore. They were becoming predators, calculating in their pursuit of prey. One night, as the group gathered to plan their next move, a commotion outside broke the silence. Footsteps echoed through the ruined streets, and the sound of distant voices carried on the wind. It wasn't the infected. It was something worse. The door to the clinic burst open, and in stepped a group of armed survivors, led by a man named Jimmy Crystal. His eyes gleamed with a mixture of desperation and authority. "We're taking this clinic," Jimmy said, his voice laced with cold certainty. "We've been watching you. You have what we need: supplies, knowledge, protection. Hand it over." Jamie's hand instinctively moved to his belt, where he carried a small weapon. But he knew there were too many of them. The clinic, their fragile refuge, was about to become a battleground. Jimmy's men positioned themselves in the room, weapons drawn. Some of them looked uncertain, others eager for a fight. Jamie and Kelson exchanged a brief glance. The tension in the room thickened as the truth began to sink in. They were at the mercy of these survivors. You've been here long enough, Jimmy continued, pacing the room. But you're weak. We've got a better plan for the future. And that means you're either with us, or you're in the way. Spike's heart raced as he watched his father's expression harden. Jamie stepped forward slowly, keeping his voice calm. We're not here to fight you. We came to save my wife. If you want the clinic, you'll have to go through us. Jimmy chuckled, the sound of it sending a chill down Spike's spine. We're already through you. Without warning, one of Jimmy's men lunged at Dr. Kelson, aiming to seize control of the medical equipment. A scuffle broke out. Spike stood frozen in the chaos, too scared to move, unsure whether to run or fight. Jamie tackled the assailant, struggling to get the upper hand. The room became a blur of violence, fists, guns, shouting. Spike watched as his father fought for survival, his eyes filled with an intensity that spoke of pure desperation. Dr. Kelson shouted for them to retreat to the back of the clinic, but it was clear that they were outnumbered. Spike's mind raced. They couldn't lose everything now. He saw a shadow out of the corner of his eye. The infected had found them. The situation grew worse by the second. As Jamie and the survivors fought, the clinic was slowly being overtaken by chaos. The infected had surrounded the building, their growls growing louder, their numbers swelling. Dr. Kelson had said it was only a matter of time before they would have to fight them off. The infected were relentless, not stopping for anything, not even to eat. But the real danger wasn't just the infected. It was the men who were supposed to be their allies. Jimmy's true intentions were coming into focus. His thirst for power wasn't hidden anymore. He wasn't a leader trying to save others. He was a man driven by control, by greed. Jamie, Spike, and the remaining survivors found themselves cornered. The infected were closing in from all sides, and Jimmy's group was no better. As the infected broke through the clinic's outer walls, the group had no choice but to make a stand. They fought tooth and nail, desperate to hold the infected off long enough to escape. Bullets flew, the sound of combat mixed with the grating growls of the infected. It was a nightmare they had all feared, a fight for their lives, not just against the virus, but against humanity itself. Spike could hear his heart pounding in his ears as he and his father fought side by side, swinging improvised weapons and barricading doors. The clinic was no longer a place of hope. It was a fortress of desperation. Jimmy, too focused on power, made a fatal mistake. He underestimated the infected. When the walls broke down, everything collapsed. The infected poured in, and Jimmy's group, unprepared for this reality, was overwhelmed. Hours later, the fight had dwindled down. The clinic was in ruins, the bodies of both survivors and infected littering the ground. The survivors who had made it through the battle huddled together, bloodied and exhausted. It had been a brutal victory, but they had won. Dr. Kelson, injured but alive, gathered everyone together. We have the cure. It's incomplete, but it's a start, he said, his voice quiet but resolute. We can still make a future. It won't be easy. It never is. But if we keep moving forward, we might just have a chance. Jamie and Spike stood side by side, staring out into the horizon. The world was broken, but it was not beyond repair. The future had to be fought for. As the survivors began to rebuild, Jamie knew one thing for certain. The fight wasn't over. It was only just beginning.